welcome everybody to this very, very special, long awaited edition of the Silverscreen Action Figure Podcast. This is your host, Andre Joseph of AJ Epics Productions, and this is a special roundtable on the very episode that you guys have demanded, requested, and probably want to hear our thoughts about, and that is the magnificent Star Wars. Joining me today is my usual partner in crime and fellow Star Wars fan, Mr. Albert Albany. Say hello.
Hey guys, what's going on? Nice to see you again.
And joining me again is our returning champion, Mr. Jesse Jobin. Say hello.
How's it going, guys? Good to be back again.
Great to have you guys on. And before we start, I just want to give a special dedication to a friend of mine who just passed away recently, Jonathan Watson. We grew up together as kids through our parents, and we were both big Ghostbusters fans and Turtles fans. Even thought about the other day about like some of the times where we would go to each other's birthday parties, go to Fun Station. We used to play like Sega at his house, and so many things that I remember about him. And we kind of lost touch for some time, and only found out in New Year's that he had passed away just before the ball dropped. So, my heart goes out to him, his family, and I don't ever forget about any of my old friends from those days. It just seems like time goes by too fast, and sometimes you just have to like Ferris Bueller said, you got to kind of look around and appreciate it now because one day you're gonna miss it. So, my heart goes out to him, and this episode is dedicated to him in his memory. So, now that we got that out of the way, let's get into the topic of discussion. So, we're going to try to do something unique because for many of you guys, now you've probably heard my previous episode with the Junk Man, who is notorious for his love for Star Wars, and we've talked extensively about his experience collecting the figures and his knowledge of the old 1970s Kenner action figures and everything up until the prequels and today. And you've had TV shows like The Toys That Made Us, among many others, that have discussed the history of the figures in very deep detail. So we're going to try to go for more of the personal perspective. Being that we're fans, we've looked at it from the fan perspective, and I certainly, as I've gotten older, looked at it from the filmmaking perspective. And that's where we're going to begin. So I'm just going to kind of go around and talk about like how we kind of got our interest in Star Wars growing up. For me, I was sort of a late bloomer, and it's weird how I got into it. So, as a kid, Spaceballs had hit video, and I was watching that constantly. Like, my uncle and my aunt had, like, they used to record all the movies off of HBO. So, it was one of the ones that they let me borrow, and I must have watched that thing to death because it was so funny and so fun to the point where I dropped root beer on the tape and never played again. Not properly. And like I really love that movie so much that every time that scene with the Schwartz bringing out like the Spaceballs, Spaceballs a T-shirt, Spaceballs the flamethrower, like they had the action figures. I'm like, damn it, I want to get those toys, because I was collecting Ghostbusters and collecting Batman, and I wanted those Spaceball figures. I did not know until a rebroadcast of the first Star Wars movie that this was a parody of that.
I
And
think it's great that you based your love for Star Wars, like it introduced you from a parody. I think that's fantastic.
yeah, and a damn good parody that still holds
Oh
up
yeah,
today.
absolutely,
Yeah, absolutely,
absolutely.
100%.
Yeah, Mel Brooks, while you're still alive, give us Spaceball figures.
Mel Brooks, while he's still alive, make another Spaceballs.
Yes,
That's what
seriously.
that's what I was thinking.
The search for more money.
There's always look. Disney will tell you there's always a search for more money.
I mean, if they're remaking everything else, like why not a part two of that?
I'm totally in on it.
Yeah, definitely, man. I mean,
Although Rick Moranis is retired from acting, so that might be a little bit hard to.
Is he?
if
Isn't
it's
he?
written right, he'll do it. He's not fully retired. He just wants a good script.
I was gonna say, is it confirmed that he's gonna be or not be part of the new
He's not.
Ghostbusters?
No, he's
He's
not.
not. So the story with Rick Moranis was that his wife passed away and he
Yeah,
stepped
I
back to
remember.
raise his
I remember
kids.
that. Yeah.
And I think that like he's only taken like mostly voice acting.
Yeah, I
Like
think he did like those animated bear movies.
Yeah.
In the 2000s.
I think that's mostly what he's done because it's not anything that's taking him away from it. So I think that might be a little bit hard to
Yeah.
But I mean, hey, look, you know what? Update the entire roster if you need to.
I agree. I mean, Bill Pullman's still around. He always needs work, so why not?
Yeah, you know,
So yeah, I mean, my love for Star Wars started late, as I said before. So I mean, I started watching movies on cable. Sometimes, family friends would have it on video. It was only like maybe watching bits and pieces of the first film and Return of Jedi that it just was little by little I was starting to get into it. And then it was my neighbor who got me into virtually every toy that I ever collected, who also had Star Wars figures. My cousin even had some Star Wars figures from The Empire Strikes Back. And I was like, yeah, I kind of like playing with these. I want to get more of them. But at that point, this was 1991, 1992. So these were the dark ages when nobody was into it. Everybody thought
yeah.
it was like childish. And then there was like this book that I remember, and it's over my head who wrote it, but it was pictures of all the films, like the behind the scenes, and then there was like the merchandising part in one of the last chapters, and it had that whole picture of like every single Kenner figure from Star Wars Return of Jedi, and I said, okay, now I want to find these. Now I'm on a figure hunt. Because it was that Christmas I also got the box set of the Star Wars trilogy and the behind the scenes video.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was watching that constantly, and then that began the 2 year odyssey of me and my dad going to toy shows in Jersey and in New York to find figures that sometimes they were expensive, sometimes we looked at and got them dirt cheap in like an antique store where nobody thought they were of any value, and literally like got a C3PO case, and then I just started filling it up from there. And the rest was kind of history for me as far as the films and how it influenced me and my experience as a filmmaker wanting to grow up and do that. And then I think for you guys, you kind of came into it later after I did. So why don't we start with you, Albert? Like when you first started?
So I actually, the first Star Wars movie I ever saw was the original Star Wars film, and I was actually at our mutual friend Dennis's house. Randomly, we were just like, I went to his house one day, and it would just happen to be on like CBS or ABC or whatever channel it was, and we were watching. I was like, this is really cool, and I liked it, but I didn't love it, and I didn't get that there was a phenomenon, and I didn't realize there were two other movies. I was just like, oh, so this is Star Wars, you know? My dad's a Trekkie, and because of that, I really didn't have an introduction to Star Wars when I was younger because you know how most fans of these certain fandoms
You
are.
can't like both.
Exactly, you're not allowed for some reason. So he was that guy. He liked Star Trek, and I knew a lot about Star Trek. I knew nothing about Star Wars. Um, but I liked the movie, the movie, but I never really kind of got too deep into it. But the figures, like I played with them as a kid because a couple of my cousins and a couple of my friends had them, and I knew who the characters were, but I only knew about them based on the one movie I had seen. So I kind of didn't get too deep into it. But right around like my senior year of high school, maybe like my first year of college, um, hung out with a whole bunch of people, and like a general discussion about Star Wars started, and I was like, I don't get what everything is about. Like I saw the movie and they're like, dude, like there's six of these now. Like, what do you mean you saw the movie? Like, catch up, watch them all, and tell me what you think. And I was like, I don't want to do that. I don't need to. That's just another fandom that everybody's into that I don't want to be into because I admit it, I'm a jerk like that. If it's popular, I
Oh
usually
yeah,
don't like it.
that's the cool thing to do.
Yeah, and that was me. But finally, it was John Trabuscio who told me, "Look, I have all six movies. Take them all, watch them all, and then tell me what you think." And that was it. I was off to the races. I was obsessed. I was like, these are some of the best movies ever made. Why didn't I get into this as I was younger? So I lucked out that by that point, Star Wars was now a phenomenon. So you can walk into any toy store and there's Star Wars figures on the shelves. So I started thinking to myself, well, I'm just going to get the characters that are important to me. So that's how I started my collection. And the first one I got was Darth Vader, and then just started going, up and up and up until I had, the collection that I have today, which isn't as extensive as I want it to be, but that's just because my wrestling figure obsession has taken over more than anything else.
Yeah, so I see.
Yeah, yeah. Full disclosure, guys, we're filming in my room, and they can see how bad it's
Yeah,
gotten.
it's I think this is where Toys R Us went.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's close. And yeah, yeah, it's bad. But yeah, that's how my obsession in fandom started.
All right, Jesse, what about you?
All right, so I just want to get the timeline correct. So, Return of the Jedi is the last of the original trilogy.
Yeah, it came out in
The,
1983.
okay, it came out 83. I was born in 85.
I was born in 83,
Uh,
like 3 months
all right,
after.
so I just wanted to clarify
Yeah.
that we all were born basically after the phenomenon was already done
Yes.
with.
Right, exactly.
So, in one of the previous episodes I was on about the Power Rangers, when I started collecting those toys, my parents would take me to Woolworths, and you would have to go to this big glass case to get your toy. And I remember seeing the Star Wars toys there as a kid, but had no idea what they were. But around the same time, so you gentlemen being around the same age as I am, you live in New York. WPIX Channel 11 used to
Yes,
show the afternoon movie.
yes.
Yes.
That's probably where I saw
That's
mine.
that
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's where I saw the original Star Wars back when you only had like 5 stations,
right.
at your disposal. So like that's really where I saw the movies. But also, I guess because of my age, like I'm 34 now, so I used to have this big trunk from when I was a kid, and it was just filled with toys. And I can't really tell you where they came from, but there were Star Wars toys in there too. Like I remember, like the Dewback figure,
Yeah.
kind of looked like a dinosaur, I guess.
Yeah.
And like all these random like stormtroopers and like Han and Luke and Darth Vader and all these characters that I had no idea what they were, but they just ended up in that trunk somehow. And but yeah, so around like 95, I think, or 94 was when I saw the movies in the afternoon Channel 11 movie of the week. So that was my exposure to Star Wars. Um, but I think around 99 was my freshman year in high school. I think when I met you guys.
Yeah.
Um, they came out with episode 1,
Right.
the new trilogy, but I remember the Nintendo 64 game, the Pod Racer game.
Yes.
Hmm.
That was another introduction because I was already a big gamer and playing Nintendo 64 all the time. So that was also another thing that got me into the fandom, I guess. So,
Yeah. So, like I said, you've watched these shows, so you've already heard, for people listening, you've probably heard stories about how the figures were made, how they came about, the different variants of Han Solo, Boba Fett with the rocket launcher shooting, and they had to like cut that down because kids were poking their
yeah.
eyes out with it.
Yeah. Well.
Um, I mean, like when these figures came out, it was interesting because back then nobody was thinking about merchandising for movies back in the 70s and even way before that. You had like maybe Mego dolls of classic TV shows at that time,
Yeah.
like $6 Million Man and SWAT and all those other TV shows, and some movies that may have been appealing to kids, a number of Disney films, but nobody was really thinking about how merchandising could change the way people would look at a film and add extra revenue to it. So George Lucas, obviously he had this vision in mind of the type of movie he was making. He was trying to make his own Flash Gordon. And by making this movie, remember, 1970s, the big films at the time were mostly, you had the big disaster movies like Jaws, the Earthquake, The Exorcist, or the political conspiracy films like All the President's Men, Parallax View, and so on. So, really, movies that were being geared more towards adults that were more about the quality of the script and the talent. Nobody was really taking Star Wars seriously back then, especially as they were making the film. People didn't understand, why is there a big man dressed like a dog? Why is there a guy in a black helmet who speaks like a evil Englishman, until they put James Earl Jones's voice on there.
Right.
And nobody really took this movie seriously until, like I guess he was doing the rough cut, and again, nobody thought this movie was going to be successful except for Steven Spielberg, who was a friend of his.
Well,
And
that's the whole bet.
right, he put the whole bet that this was going to be a huge thing.
And even George Lucas didn't think so. It
Right.
was Close Encounters of the Third Kind was the Spielberg movie that came out, right?
Yes.
And he thought that was going to make more money than Star Wars.
Hmm.
Yep. Well, lose a bet.
Yeah. And I mean, he already had, I guess he was already going out trying to get licensing deals for merchandising, and Kenner, which was already still sort of like, they weren't huge as a toy manufacturer. They weren't Mattel at that time.
Right.
So he made the deal with them over Mattel to make figures for this movie. And at that point, 20th Century Fox thought the movie was going to bomb, so they sold half the profits to Lucas, thinking, he's going to go broke and homeless. Just give this whole thing to him, not knowing how huge it was going to be, and then the merchandising was going to make it even more richer for him 10 times over. While Close Encounters only got a board game, so
Right.
that should tell you everything you need to know. And the merchandising, in many ways, defined this whole franchise just as much as the substance of the stories. And as time went along, especially by the time you got to Return of the Jedi, it almost seemed like they were creating characters specifically for the action figures,
Right.
which became a whole trend in itself
Well, the
throughout the
Ninja
80s.
Turtles did the same, and Ghostbusters also did the same thing, as far as their toys went too, and like they were just spewing them out like it was water.
And about characters that weren't even in existence. Like
Right.
we covered this in the Ghostbuster
Yeah.
episode where there was just like a bunch of random Ghostbuster villains that like you didn't even like. Maybe they had like a brief like run on the animated TV show, or you didn't even
Yeah.
see, and they were just
Right.
like characters just being created. And that's inherently some of the things that I think make filmmaking a little bit difficult because you want like the term in the toy industry is you want somebody who's toyetic. You want to walk down the aisle and you want a kid to stop and turn and go, "Mom, I want that." Not even knowing who it is, but they're bright or they're colorful or they look cool. And you want characters that look like that, and that's how merchandising starts. But that also, on your end of the equation, Andre, as a filmmaker, hey, I created this great thing. Great. Make things that look like this in your movie so we can sell them to other people. And it's like, well, damn. Like now I got like other people like having their hands in my
Right.
film. So
And certainly those decisions with the merchandising, especially with Return to Jedi, it really took an influence on the quality of the storytelling. Now, keep in mind, George Lucas had loose outlines for every movie prior to Episode 4, A New Hope. That's the original Star Wars movie for the casual fans out there. And as time went on, he started backing away from, the more darker elements of where he was going with it, because he started to think, especially when he did Raiders of the Lost Ark, which he produced and Spielberg directed,
right,
he started thinking the audience only wanted more action. They wanted more excitement as opposed to, like what Empire Strikes Back being more about the cerebral way of Luke Skywalker trying to be a Jedi, and how jaded things get when he goes to Dagobah for the training and not believing in himself. This very existential experience completely goes away by Jedi. It just becomes strictly about action.
right,
And that, again, the toys played a big part in this, because let's remember Harrison Ford. Now, he became a big star after playing Indiana Jones and didn't want to do Jedi. At the
right,
very least, he wanted to be killed off.
right. Which is
And
why he was in Carbonite.
right, but George Lucas basically made it clear he needed him alive for the toys. He did not want suddenly for kids to buy a guy who dies in the movie, or whatever his weird ass philosophy was, but somehow he worked out a deal to get him back in.
Right.
Even though Han, even as a fan, when you look back at that movie, it's like, I understand where Harrison Ford's coming from. After he gets saved, what else is there for him to do other than for him to find out Luke and Leia are brother and sister? So now I could get with Leia, like
Right.
there really wasn't much else except to just be there for his friends. The Ewoks, the Ewoks originally they were supposed to be the Wookiees. They were supposed to go to a Wookiee planet, and then they changed it for whatever reason to smaller scale versions of Wookiees and just changed the name,
Right.
and you can't tell me that George Lucas thought in the back of his mind, this is going to do for me what E.T. did for Spielberg, that kids are going to go out, they're going to want to buy a bunch of these Ewok action figures and dolls, and then we'll make spin-off movies and cartoons and make more figures out of them. He had that mind of an entrepreneur. It wasn't just filmmaking for him at that point.
So funny story about the Ewoks. And my older sister Kelly was, she was alive right when the Ewok craze kind of hit, and that's her only exposure to the Star Wars films in and of themselves at all. I don't know if she's actually sat down and watched any full Star Wars film,
So she saw the Ewok movie.
but she saw the Ewok movie. And my first dog that we actually that we had,
Wicket.
his name was Wicket.
Oh wow.
Mm.
And that's we had a Wicket ornament that we like put on our Christmas tree every year. Like she was obsessed with the Ewoks, and I find it's funny that it's like there's that little small portion of the Star Wars universe that kind of appealed to this little girl growing up, and it was these little cute and cuddly things, and George Lucas is a freaking genius because that's how he expanded his universe.
Yeah, I mean, again, when you go back to Jedi, there were just so many characters that they were making figures for.
Yeah.
And that sometimes made my toy figure hunting really ridiculous because even the most obscure characters that had no
Right.
purpose in the plot became the most expensive. Like,
Right.
Especially like the store exclusive ones.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like, it was literally everybody from Yak Face. Who the hell is Yak Face in this movie that suddenly he has to be like one of the most hardest figures to find? Or the Max
I,
Rebo
I
band.
think I
Yeah.
think it's the obscurity of the character that makes it so like you want it so bad just because it's so fucking strange.
I know, and even now, as I look at some of these websites, and as we're trying to research for this episode, I'm realizing there's a shit ton of figures I still don't have, and
Yeah.
I'm not even talking about like the droids and Ewoks cartoons. Forget that shit. To me, they don't count.
Right.
But looking at like some of the exclusives, particularly like the ones that came with the play sets, like the creature inside the garbage chute.
Oh my god, I wanted that so
I
bad.
would see that all the time in like this toy store in Flemington, New Jersey, thinking it was like a bootleg, and then to
Yeah.
find out it was like really the
A,
real thing because it was all painted in green.
Yeah.
a
It
lot
looked like
of
a
a
Play-Doh.
lot of those Kenner figures like you could mistake them for like bootlegs.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
You still go to like a dollar store now, you see similar looking figures, from like Mexico or something that you would mistake those for.
yeah. I mean, there's like these little droids that I never realized they made. There were a couple of the like.
How about Snaggletooth?
Oh,
Yes.
I had Snaggletooth.
So there's one with the red outfit on and he has like a gray face. But then there's a blue Sears exclusive. Only came with the Katina playset and it came with a stormtrooper pistol, but he's wearing blue and his face is more white now.
I
Like
think I had
he's
the
like
blue version
I
of
think
it.
he goes along with Yak Face. Like
Yeah.
Ooh,
he
yeah.
didn't really bring it. Like he's not bringing it. Walrus Man. What is that?
So I mean, there's that scene
Yeah.
in Jedi with all the bounty hunters, and those
Yeah.
were
Yeah.
like, and everybody was like, these are the hardest. Like for some reason, they made a figure of all the bounty hunters. Meanwhile, we knew two of them, and that was it. Nobody cared about any more of them. And they became like those are the hard to
Yeah, I
find
mean,
figures. Like
basically it's just Greedo and Han.
like
Like that's all you need to know,
Yeah.
and then later on the Fets. But
and there was IG-88.
Yes, IGAA, who plays up later in The Mandalorian, which
yes,
I want to talk a little bit about later.
Yeah, definitely.
Um, but I think the one line that always got on my nerves, and it was kind of the start of where things got really absurd with Star Wars figures, was the very last line that came out in the original Kenner run, and that was "Power of the Force."
Yes.
Now I'm not talking about the 1995 one. We're going to get into that,
Yeah.
but the very last set when. At that point, all the movies had come out. At that time, it didn't seem like there were going to be any more films anytime soon. The prequels were only like a decade away. And so Kenner was still trying to milk this thing for what it was worth. And what they tried to do was, okay, they went and made more figures of characters we didn't get. So we got an Anakin Skywalker
Right.
from the original from Return to Jedi. We got an A-wing pilot. We got Han Solo and the Carbonite. And we got more Ewoks, of course. But then there were like some figures where it just got a little absurd. Like, did we need another Luke Skywalker with the biker helmet and the poncho? Like suddenly it was like, let's take every single scene and every single shot and make an action figure out of it.
well, let's look at it from where we are right now. We're all 30 something. You know, you see these action figures from all your favorite fandoms. Don't you want those variants? Like now, if you're a collector, Albert, you collect wrestling figures up the wazoo.
Absolutely. I
You
have
want the variants,
like
right?
for example, so I started rebuilding my building my elite collection, and my rule, because and that's the thing about being an action figure collector. You have to set your own set of rules. Nobody's rules are the same as anybody else's, and nobody can tell you how to collect because you collect what you want. So my general rule was, I want like a popular character in like what in like their in every iteration of like their bigger iteration of
I
character.
feel the same way.
So like I want an original. I knew like I want an original Macho Man in the orange trunks. I wanted Macho King. I wanted Macho Man from WrestleMania 7, Macho Man from WrestleMania, you know what I mean? 6, like all those different
Yeah,
kinds. So
like even the same for me. Like I collect Funko Pops, and like I have a Macho Man figure, but like there's like three versions of it, and I want them all just because I love Macho Man.
right.
You know, same thing like you're saying.
So that's I think what your point was, Jesse. It's that like at that point, sure, it didn't seem like that was something that you personally were probably like, I don't need him riding on the bike. Like, who really gives a crap? But you know what? There are probably kids that were recreating the entire like series by themselves, like watching it and be like, all right, hold on, wait. This next scene, Luke's on the speeder bike. Let's grab speeder bike Luke, put him on the speeder bike. Let's go. All right, here we go. He's now getting chased into Forest Woods of Endor. You know
Yeah,
what
I
I mean?
mean
Like,
like if you go to the movie when they're in Hoth and it's like snow, it's snow everywhere,
right.
but you want that Luke with the the tauntaun and the wampa,
I have
Yeah.
the
like
Wampa.
yeah, like you
Yeah.
want to like you could reenact that if it's like snowing out where you live, and you could even film it if you wanted to, like stop motion or something.
Okay, so speaking of reenactments, one thing that I didn't collect as much, and maybe I lucked out sometimes, and I'll get to some of my toy hunting stories here, is the play sets.
Okay.
So I thought at the time, as I was collecting these figures, now the vehicles I was crazy about.
Yeah, I think the vehicles in every line, it's just always
Yeah,
like the coolest part of it. I
I
don't know
could
why, but they're just badass.
I could never forget when I was in fourth grade. This is when I started really collecting. And keep in mind, these were the dark ages of Star Wars when nobody was into it. But my principal in my school, her kids were huge Star Wars fans, and they were already off to college, and they had the toys kind of left behind. They were probably going to sell them off, and she noticed like I was doing some stuff because we had like a writer's workshop class, and a lot of my stuff was very Star Wars influenced. And I was telling her, yeah, I've been like me and my dad trying to find the toys and stuff. So one day she brought the Millennium Falcon, and I couldn't keep it, but she let me borrow it so I could like play with it and kind of clean it out because it was kind of dusty. And I said, Dad, I gotta get a Millennium Falcon. I don't know how we're gonna do it, but we gotta get one. Sure enough, we're at a toy fair in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, and somebody has this big box full of vehicles. They had a Falcon, it had an X-wing, it had an A-wing, and like not all the parts were there, but I think there was enough with the Falcon where it was like good enough I could play with it. And some of the play sets, like the Hoth play set and the Droid Factory from the first movie. So we got that stuff dirt cheap, maybe like under
It's
$25 in
crazy.
this whole box, and then like a bunch of extra stuff in there, like a Star Trek 3 booklet, like some weird stuff. Because I guess I was just trying to like clear out their closet.
Yeah, this guy probably just had like,
Yeah.
oh, this kid's got my kid's got toys, and you want them anymore? No, all right, I'm just gonna sell them.
The crazy thing, like for us today as older people, if you're a collector and your friend's grandma just has some boxes in the attic, and then you open them up and you find like some old Star Wars toys or like Ghostbusters, Ninja Turtles, like that's like hitting the jackpot.
Seriously.
Yeah.
There was a show on I can't remember what it was on, but it was called Toy Hunter, and one of the best shows. I don't know why they ever canceled it because I'm still really mad about it. He would specifically seek out certain figures from certain lines. It would be like, hey, I have a person who's like looking for really cool wrestling stuff, or I have a person who's looking for really cool Star Wars stuff, like stuff that like they may not have. And he would go to all these different conventions, hook up with different people, and that was what he would do. Like there were points where he'd be like, hey, this person knows like this grandma who has like a bunch of boxes who she wants to get rid of. I'm gonna go up there and make offers to them for all this kind of stuff. It's the coolest thing ever. Like that's like my dream. Like I want to find like somebody who's like having an estate sale. Be like, I'm getting rid of all this wrestling stuff. Here you go, $30. Just clear these things
Yeah.
out of here. That's like I want that. That's my dream of dreams.
That might be better than hitting the lottery.
Oh, for me, yeah, absolutely.
Now, to play off what you were just talking about, like if you remember the show from recent years, Comic Book Men, you
Yes.
know Kevin Smith's shop in New Jersey, Jay and Silent Bob's Secret Stash. So like people would bring in not just comics but also like toys, and they had a person who specialized in the worth of toys. But somebody I remember they brought in the GI Joe the like the aircraft carrier,
Yes.
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 and like the
Cousin
like
had that.
yeah, they were like going crazy, like that was like the holy grail, you know. I never had it as a kid, but like I did play with GI Joes, but like even looking at it as an adult, I thought it would look pretty awesome.
It is.
Yeah.
And like that was also the fun thing too about the Kenner figures. They were GI Joes.
Yeah.
You know, they were
Well, I
just
was gonna say that earlier.
yeah.
They're pretty much the same.
It's just like they're that same scale. So
Yeah.
that used to be fun too because I used to just like incorporate my GI
Right.
Joes with
Yeah.
everything and be like, all right, well, I need stormtroopers. These are my stormtroopers now. You know,
Yeah.
like and you let your mind run wild for a little bit, and then they also later on released, and I'm assuming it was Kenner as well, the Street Fighter figures, which were
Right.
the
Right.
same
Right.
scale too. So it
Yeah.
was
Those ones I did collect. I do remember some of them being like a little flimsy as far as because like their joints were connected with like rubber bands.
yes,
So you pull too hard, that it's a wrap, you know.
right. And then you grow up and you play with that stuff, and then Andre makes my dream come true because we did the first Dishonorable Vendetta film, and Andre made an action figure, made action figures of like the main cast.
That's right.
So now I have my own GI Joe version of myself, which is the most badass thing ever.
Okay, so now you talk about Power to Force. Like I said, in those dark ages, there wasn't a whole lot of merchandise, but I do remember one thing that I can say I was like a kid in a candy store. The second year that I went to Disney World, and they still had the Star Tours ride, which, was like one of the things I had to do at that point because I was already a huge fan. And coming off the ride and that merchandise stand.
Oof.
Now, we we have Galaxy's Edge today. I still need to go there and
Yeah,
check
yeah.
that out.
Me too.
But
I'm a big Disney fan too, so
but keep in mind back then where you go into the store. Now, while they weren't making Kenner figures, they had their own exclusives. They had like those PVC figures of like C3PO and R2D2 and some of the other like I think they had a Chewbacca and most of like the creature characters.
right.
So I remember buying some of those, and then there were also like these, I would say these LJN wrestler style dolls of all the main characters, and they were made of this hard plastic that you could actually like get some different variants of. So I have like Luke in his Return to Jedi outfit, one of him with Yoda in the back. I
Love that.
have Han, Leia from the first film, and a Darth Vader and a Stormtrooper and a Chewbacca, and
See,
those were not cheap.
You have to have the variants.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
It
like
was whatever was there. Like I just
yeah.
had
But
to
you
think.
had to have it.
Yeah.
So my when it comes to the Disney stuff, there's if you're a person who frequents Disney, you know that there are things that just say Disney, and there are things that say Disney Parks. And the Disney Park stuff is exclusive that they only sell at the parks. And they had when I had gone the first year, and I rode Star Tours, I got off and I went, oh crap, here we go. Now I'm in a Star Wars warehouse. There goes all my money. Um, they had Disney Parks playsets, and that I just every year that I've gone to Disney since I bought a Disney Parks playset, and it's just like 6 different figures just in the box, just sitting there, and I've bought one every year because those are you start getting into like really being a collector. Now these are things I can't buy unless I'm in a park. I gotta start getting all these now as much as I can. So, I actually the second year I went to Disney, I went like 5 years in a row. Um, I realized, all right, bring a carry-on with you, and don't put anything in it because you're gonna come back with a Star Wars playset. So that was like as an adult, that's been my most fun collecting because I can only go one time a year. I haven't been in 2 years now, so they probably release a whole bunch of ones I don't have. But it's fun to go in there and be like, all right, these are the ones I don't have. I have to go through my collection, look at everything, take pictures of it before I go, and think to myself, all right, I have this one, I have this one. Oh, don't have that one, and grab that one. But that's the fun of the hunt. That's where as a 34-year-old man, I feel like a kid again. It's walking down the aisle of a toy store or just a regular store now because there are no more toy stores. But
Yeah.
and seeing what's there, and I now, as a wrestling fan, there's really no stores on Staten Island that sell anything anymore. So when I go to Jersey once a week, I slip into a Walmart and I walk down that aisle, and it's like you get that rush as a kid, like, are the ones that I want going to be there? Like, am I going to be able to get the ones I want for my collection? That's the most fun of being a collector. I don't care what anybody says. Like, having them and looking at your collection is one thing, but the thrill of the hunt is the fun part. And there's always this general question. Actually, we were talking earlier about the Zack Ryder and Kurt Hawkins
Right,
wrestling podcast.
right.
This week, they had Chelsea Green on there, and she was just talking to Zack Ryder, and she said, like, when does it end? And he said it doesn't, and it doesn't because it's the thrill of the hunt. Like, it's
Yeah.
so much fun.
I mean, I guess from my perspective, because I never went to Disney as a child. Like my,
Neither did I.
I've only been there like maybe 3 times in my whole life, and I was much older at this point and already a. Well, the second time I went, I was a parent. The first time we were expecting. So I didn't have the pleasure of like being a fan at the time. I guess I was more concerned about my kids having a good time and my wife, things like that. Um, however, because I collect the Funko Pops, recently Funko's been coming out with a lot of Disney Park exclusives.
Yeah.
And like while I don't have, I guess, the funds to go to Disney as often as I'd like, I guess, uh, my one of my managers at work just went there, and I told her, can you pick me up this Mickey Mouse basketball Funko Pop from the NBA experience at the Disney park? And it's just because it has that Disney exclusive sticker on it,
Yep.
like it becomes a little more valuable, and like while it's not the same as you going there and getting it yourself, I still enjoy that part of it too. Like even just if you want to say the hunt, you're doing it online too. Like
Yeah.
you look for them on eBay and stuff, even things from your childhood. Once you find it and you can get a good deal on it and you just click pay now, it kind of gives me that same thrill.
Yeah. Definitely. I recently went back and bought a couple of, and I say recently, it's been maybe a couple months ago, but I had a lot of different Masters of the Universe toys when I was a kid that I just like broke or like I couldn't find anymore or whatever. And I went on eBay and I found like a lot of them of like six for like $12, and I was like the happiest person ever. I was like, this is my childhood, and bought them,
Yeah.
and they're just sitting in a bag somewhere. But I have them, and that's all that matters,
I'm the same way. Like currently with like Super Nintendo games, I go and find as whatever a good deal I can get on eBay for something from my childhood. Like my wife just got me Saturday Night Slam Masters for
Oh
Christmas,
my god, it's amazing.
so like I popped it in the first night I got it, and it was awesome.
But I mean, that brings us back to like what we're talking about with Star Wars. Like a lot of like adult collectors now, if you want to get like these older Kenner figures, you either gotta find a specific toy store that like sells them, and if you're in a store, you're gonna spend a lot of money because they know what they're talking about, or like you had said, flea markets and random places that just hope to God
Yeah.
that somebody has something that you have,
Uh,
or it's eBay.
Unfortunately, like where we live in Staten Island, New York, there's not too many like flea markets. But like if you go to Jersey or like a little more down south, like when we were in Virginia recently, me and my family, like there were a lot of flea markets down there, and you can find things like that, like cool old toys. There's actually a place I think it's like a 3 or 4 hour drive from Staten Island, but it's in part of Pennsylvania. It's called Pandora's Box, but they specialize in like old school toys, like the places you see Zack Ryder and Kurt Hawkins go.
Right.
Like they travel to these places, and it's kind of like an investment if you're the owner of that store. Like if you can pick up a bunch of these toys and flip them for a profit and buy more toys and then sell those, and you just build from there.
Yeah, and the whole thrill of the hunt, I would say Star Wars changed me as far as collecting toys and playing with them. Because up until that time, when whether it was Batman or Ghostbusters or Ninja Turtles, I would get the toys, I would take them out of the package, and then I'd start playing with them.
Of course.
Creating my stories literally in my bedroom. With Star Wars, when I first started, I only had like just a few small figures. I had the Luke from Jedi. I had a chewed up Princess Leia from Empire, which I think I chewed off the head when I was very young
I
from
was
my
gonna
cousin.
say the
Yeah.
toys that you got from the Star Toys. You said they were similar to like the LJN figures. I was like, did you bite those? Because the wrestlers always ended up getting eaten for some reason.
Oh no, it's like those figures were hollow inside. That
And
that
like,
wasn't
and it's
gonna
funny. That's a general thing
It
that like
really is. Like you
people.
bite the fucking nose off for some reason.
I don't get it. And like, it's funny that like I remember being a kid. The LJNs were my first figures because my sister had them,
Yeah.
and like I remember, I was just like biting on Macho Man's arm, and I'm like, why am I doing this? And then I'm listening to the Major Wrestling Figure podcast, and Zack Ryder's talking about they did a history of LJN episode with Conrad Thompson,
Right. Right.
and he's talking about how he was like, oh, I used
Oh,
to chew on Jake the Snake. Like, why does everybody chew on these damn figures?
it's funny that you mentioned that because I did see that episode recently on YouTube, and there was a part in this in the video where they show the naked Miss Elizabeth
Yes,
that somebody that worked at the place made. Like I wonder if there are any like naked Leias wandering around
I'm
some
sure there probably are.
somebody's
Oh.
house.
Well, and that's the thing with when it comes to like these toys and stuff like that. There are like we get down to the nitty gritty of ideas of like variants and stuff like that. There are like things like unreleased prototypes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And like that's the idea with that Miss Elizabeth that like some people in the factory were just joking around. They were like, well, we're gonna make a naked Miss Elizabeth figure. You know that there's probably like naked Carrie Fisher figures like
Yeah.
floating around somewhere
Especially
because
that slave outfit.
yep, exactly.
Yeah, I'm sure. Well, not surprised they didn't make that, but there were figures of something that was more infamous than that, and that was for the holiday special.
Oh yeah,
Oh yeah.
Yes, Life Day, people. Life
yeah.
celebrate Life Day every year.
Can we please petition Disney Plus to put that movie on their
John
streaming
Favreau's
service?
working on it.
I love John Favreau for that because that was a train wreck, and I need to see it again. I know it's on YouTube,
Yeah.
but I need to see like a nice updated, you know, really like new picture quality holiday Star Wars special.
Maybe throw Baby Yoda in there.
There you
Why
go.
not?
Just
Yeah.
do a whole new Life Day episode.
Well,
The special edition.
yeah.
yeah, and I heard John Favreau said he like was thinking about wanting to do something like that,
Yeah.
and now you have the streaming service. Let's do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, they need the content, so why
Yeah,
not?
exactly. I'm down.
But yeah, I mean, there were actually plans, as I found out later, that they were going to make Chewbacca's family as figures. And I think that was also when they were first going to bring out a Boba Fett figure, which was actually a mail away before Empire came out.
Right.
And maybe some of the other characters, we probably would have gotten a B. Arthur figure, people.
Yeah.
So that almost.
Just want to let you know you can't actually hear this, but Jesse's just has his eyes closed and just shaking his head.
But yeah, even Art Carney too.
Yes.
Yeah,
I
but
love Art Carney.
that could have happened had it not for George Lucas put the kibosh on all that.
Yeah.
But like what I was saying before too, is that once I started really getting these figures, it wasn't like me just taking them and playing with them. It just became more about, okay, I got this one, now I got to finish the whole set and get this list. And then after that, they would just go into the C3PO, the Darth Vader collectors thing, and I wouldn't really touch them that much, maybe just once in a while just to like maybe clean them out or make sure the accessories were proper. But I just became less of a kid playing with the toys than actually.
You know
Yeah.
what? I was thinking about something about this last night because I knew we'd be recording today. There's like some point in your life where you just forget about being a kid and like, you just do stupid stuff. I think it's when you become like a teenager. You feel like you're less into the stuff. But then when you fast forward to where we are now, and like I think all of us still love collecting, things that are from our childhoods or whatever. They give you that good feeling, once again, like you're reliving that feeling you had as a kid. And I like that. Like Albert was saying before his dad was a Trekkie
Yeah.
and like he didn't know much about Star Wars, and like I said, we were all born after the craze. But even like music and things like that, like none of us were born when the Beatles came out, but I'm sure we all like the Beatles, like
Yeah.
their music and stuff.
Absolutely.
Like whatever is old is new again at some point.
And certain things transcend time.
Well, yeah, exactly. I think
Yeah.
Star Wars is one of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I also remember during that time, it was actually around 95 or 96, and somehow one of my parents had a connection with the Staten Island Arts Lab, and they were doing like a big exhibition. So, really, again, nobody was into Star Wars at this time. We came with this idea, why don't we do like a Star Wars exhibit? And so we took the figures, we bought like a Star Wars poster, and we did like a whole diorama. And had like a strobe light. We had like all the John Williams music playing, and it actually caused quite a stir. We even got in the paper with it, if I could ever find the pictures. But I thought that was like the high point of me collecting the figures until I started getting into wrestling, and that is a story in
Well,
itself.
Well, well,
that's a story. That's a story that's in the archives right now that you can go back and listen
Yes.
yeah,
to.
one of the episodes I did on my show, and I've only done 3 episodes, so it's actually episode 2 of my show when I'm talking about collecting and Funkos. And I did a little research about like the psychology of collecting, and it said that usually people who have experienced some form of childhood trauma, when they collect, it gives them that good feeling again. And I think that's what people like to see when you haven't seen something in quite a few years and you go back to it. It brings you back to a place where like you were feeling great about yourself and
Yeah.
everything about you, and it kind of holds true.
And there's like maybe for many fans, there is a little bit of a drug addiction when it comes to the toys because it just seems like, as the People versus George Lucas documentary seemed to describe with the merchandise, it's like chasing the dragon. It's like just when you think you're done with your set, more figures come out. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, just like with us with the wrestling figures, with the
Absolutely.
retros. Like I finished my Hasbro set back in the 90s, and I thought, okay, that was it. I'm going to move on to the Jax figures, and that would be that. And then I grow up and not collect anymore. Mattel puts out the retros. Okay, I got to finish up that set again.
Yeah. Exactly. And that's the hard part of being a collector and being and that's why I said before you have to create your own set of rules because if not, things get out of hand. I think that and not to steer the conversation away from Star Wars, but just because you brought it up, the WWE Basic Mattel series is past Series 100. That's 100 series of figures that was released. Um, you're figuring 5 to 6 per set. You can't collect everybody,
All right.
and that's the problem with a lot of collectors, and that's what you were just saying. The idea of chasing the dragon. I need all of them. You don't need all of them.
Yeah, see, like for myself and my wife, we both collect Funkos. There are people out there that will buy every single Funko that comes out.
Yeah.
We just collect the ones that we like.
Right.
Like, I love Darkwing Duck, so I have that set. Got the Cowboy Bebop set. I don't have to have every single one.
Exactly.
Right, but and that's what it is. It's like it's generally like what I was talking about before. Okay, um I want these different Macho Mans. Sure, I want Rocker Shawn Michaels, but then I also want Shawn Michaels that won the world title for the first time, and I want the Shawn Michaels that was in DX. And it's you make up your general rules in your head for what you want. But the problem with things like Star Wars was that back in the day there wasn't like the idea of 100 different series, so it was actually feasible to buy the entire series if you really wanted to. If you wanted to invest in it, you could, and that's the hard part of being a collector. Do I really take the risk of, yeah, I want to go for it and collect every single one of these things? Because if you do, you're putting a lot of time, effort, and money into it. Especially back in the day, you had to go to a store. They had to have it. You had to buy it there, or else you're waiting for toy fairs and stuff like that, and where they're gouging you with prices and stuff like that, like they do at Comic Cons and stuff now.
Yeah, I mean, I think my unwritten rule at that time as a kid was I wasn't going to collect anything from the cartoons, and I wasn't going to go crazy on the play sets because if you look back, like say the Cantina play set,
I
it
still
was
want the Cantina playset.
which well, I'm going to get into some stories about that too, but it was mostly just dioramas with cardboard backing,
Yeah,
Yeah.
the
and that
quality wasn't great. The Jawa ship was pretty cool though.
Yes.
Because it kind of looked like what it was on the film.
Yeah.
Like it had that rust look to it. That one was pretty cool.
but there were like instances like say like the Death Star PlayStation, that sort of like to me resembled what the
Yeah.
Ghostbusters Firehouse would look like later. But I kind of like even as I look at it now, it's like I want the whole dome
Yeah.
shape
I
of the
want
Death
the
Star.
Death Star.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't want like
If
half of it.
if they would have made it like the way we would get the Technodrome later on,
Yeah.
Yes.
people would probably be going
But
nuts
there are
for it.
people crazy enough to buy like a bunch of them just to do a whole circular
You know
thing.
what? You know the way I feel about it is like this. If you have the income to not put yourself in debt and it's something you really love and it makes you happy, by all means.
Yeah, I
It's
agree.
you're not hurting me. You're
Right.
not hurting me.
And that's the thing, I joke around with my girlfriend now because she she's obviously aware of my collecting, be impossible for her not to be. And I joke around with her. She's like, you like this is what you like spend like your money on and stuff like that. I'm like, it's this or I mean, I could be on heroin, so I mean, this is a lot better of a hobby. So and she was like, I don't know why you have to go to that extreme, but that's the thing. Like it's collecting is such a fun hobby, and sure, it can get out of hand. I spent more money probably in 2019 on figures than I probably have ever spent in my life, but it made me extremely happy for that
And that's
to
all
do
that
so.
that's all that matters.
So
Yeah.
now like I'm starting to get to the point where I'm like, all right, maybe the wrestling figures it's getting to I'll try to keep up to date, but now I'm getting that itch for like maybe I should start getting some Star Wars stuff. Maybe I should go
Yeah.
out and get the ones that I have in boxes out and start displaying those, and that's the problem. It's the itch,
Well, I'm glad we got here because there was something I was thinking about. So we were talking earlier about how like the figures kind of like what you see on the screen to sell to children. Like eventually like that would be the plan. But now at this age, I don't know if I'm speaking for myself or for everybody, but at this age now, I like the Star Wars figures that look like the actual actors and
Yes,
actresses that, the more realistic they are, the more I like them.
absolutely. And I think that the Kenner figures, the depictions were good, but I mean, as
Well,
we're gonna
well, the Kenner figures, like for instance, I think there's a Han Solo with a small head and a Han Solo with a big head.
Yeah.
yeah,
And then there's like a brunette Luke and a blonde
They
Luke.
started trying to make them a little bit more accurate as they
Yeah.
went along.
But not to jump over anything because there are a billion different Star Wars merchandise and figures. But the current series is called the Black Series.
Yes.
yeah,
And the earlier editions, I don't think they had like the actual facial scanning. But now that like what we're into now, like the Lando Calrissian from the Solo movie looks exactly like Donald Glover.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I love
And, like
that.
I love it, and
Yeah,
like they got the Mandalorian now, so like they all look much more realistic, and like the articulation or how you can pose them, like it's awesome.
yeah, they've like the coming from seeing what Star Wars was with the first toys with that Kenner series to where we are now,
Yeah.
it's crazy the evolution that we have and how amazing they have been able to update technology to make these figures look so much more lifelike.
Well, yeah, I mean that kind of started in 1995 with the 1995 Power of the Force figures, and at that time, like I said, in between when they stopped making the toys in '85 to that point, they were really just there were you had the Micro Machines toys.
Treading water.
Yeah,
That's what they
and
Yeah,
they were
were.
making
yeah,
die-cast figures
Yeah.
or taking like some of the old play sets and trying to
I
recycle them.
yeah, I do remember the die cast like Micro Machines
Yeah, I had a couple of
fig. Yeah, I
those.
remember
And then
those.
you have like some of the heads, they open
Yeah.
up into like say the stormtrooper head becomes a Death
Yeah, kind of like
Star.
a
yeah,
like
Yeah.
Mighty Max
Yeah, exactly, like Mighty
replacement.
Max.
yeah.
Yeah, Polly
Polly
Pocket.
Pocket was
Yeah,
Polly
yeah, that was
Pocket.
the example I was going to use, but yeah,
yeah.
Yeah, that kind of filled the void, or going and trying to find any play sets that they were recycling, like when Robin Hood Prince of Thieves had the Sherwood Forest play set, which was the Ewok
yeah,
Right, right,
yeah,
village.
right.
So I always thought that was kind of funny. Or they took like the cantina and they made it into uh, this saloon from Butch Cassidy, the Sundance Kid, when Kenner made toys for that. It was funny how they would kind of recycle
Well,
this
I
stuff every
mean,
now and
that's
then.
just really just saving the company money of that's something they already have. Why not make a profit off of it?
right. And it's like the and you would see a lot of series do stuff like that, like Mattel would be like, all right, well, we have this line of figures, and there's accessories that go along with that can be similar. We're just gonna throw Barbie sunglasses on, this other random, GI, taller GI Joe or something like that, and that, the the phrase "that's so Jax." because Jax used to have all those weird,
Right.
random weapons that would come in wrestling figures, like draw game with a kitchen sink. Why? Because they had a kitchen sink laying around.
Well, they probably had every weapon out already, but the kitchen sink.
Right. And they probably made a kitchen sink, and they're like, well, let's release this 15 different times now.
Yeah.
So that's the general
I was
recycling
gonna
of
say
toy companies.
Jax was pretty known for just releasing accessories for the wrestling figures too.
Yeah.
Like it would just be accessories,
They
not
had
even
the
a figure.
accessory packs. Yeah.
Yeah.
Chairs, tables, and
Stretchers,
yeah.
ladders, all that.
But yeah, I mean, I remember when they put out these new figures in '95, and I was hyped
Yeah,
because it
I
was like
mean,
finally, not only were they bigger and better, but they just again they had better accuracy to the characters in the films. It also opened up the doors for figures we never got back in the old Kenner days. Um,
which after we listed those figures that they did make, it's a wonder how there was a lot of they missed, but there were.
yeah, but I always kind of found it funny how like looking back at some of these, and then I go on Mark Hamill's Twitter and just having a laugh at realizing they kind of injected steroids into everybody. Because he'd look at his figure like, I don't have muscles like that in the movie.
Well, the idea of action figures is to make it an exaggerated version of what you see. So yeah, they're always going to be, like look at like the early sets of like AWA Remcos. They're all just same
Yeah.
bodies with
They all look like Lex Luger's body.
right with just different heads on them,
Yeah.
and you wouldn't be able to tell. Like, I mean, screw it, we can do this right now. Here are two AWA Remcos, and
They are
Yep.
exactly the same.
they're the exact same figure, only one has one head and one has a different one. I'd give you $20 right now if you can name who both of these are.
Well, one I think is Larry Zabisco, right?
All right, you got
Yeah.
one.
And the other is Rick Martel.
Wow, good job,
Yeah.
Andre. I'm not really giving you $20.
Impressive.
But yeah, that's always the idea of action figures, just to make it a little bit more exaggerated. And with the Star Wars stuff now, like you were saying, now we're getting to the point where they look like they're more real life, and I think that's more important, to collectors now, because you do want to display them and make it look like
Accurate to
yeah, the
what you
closest
see on the
right.
screen. Yeah.
But you're right. Back in the day, those figures really did look like they were like
Yeah.
For all we
beefed
know,
up.
those Remcos could just be fucking He-Man.
Yeah, and it's probably that's exactly what they were.
It's just the companies are using the molds of old things that they already have, and they're just making a profit off of it.
Another thing I also liked about the newer figures was the lightsabers.
Yes.
They weren't just a bunch of little sticks coming out of the guy's hand. Now they actually look like they could glow in the dark.
right.
They had that nice sheen to it, and I think it just made those figures extra special.
And we talked earlier. We were talking about accessories.
Mhm.
If you're a Kenner collector now, that's the biggest pain for you to find.
Yeah.
It's okay, great. We have Han, but does Han have his blaster? Because if not, now your toy's incomplete.
Mhm.
Right.
And there are, which now, because of 3D printing and stuff like that,
Yeah.
so many remakes of these things. Like you're seeing,
You don't even know what's legit.
yeah, it's hard to come by. So now you're seeing like, all right, yeah, that looks like that Han Solo figure, and he's got his blaster, and you get it, and you're like, this doesn't feel the same. It's not the same
Yeah.
material. It's not the same plastic. Oh crap! Somebody 3D printed this and is just throwing it in with random figures.
I'm not sure if I spoke about it on either of the episodes I've been on with you, Andre, but going back to the glow in the dark thing, so one of my favorite things about the Funkos is the glow in the dark ones.
Right.
And one of my actual favorite figure that I own right now is Megavolt from Darkwing Duck.
Nice.
They came out with like a chase version of him that glows in the dark. For those who don't know who he is, he's like the rodent who has like the electric powers, and he has like a plug on his head. But like all of that glows, and it makes the figure a little cooler. Like that's just some like if you had a Star Wars Funko figure that glows in the dark and it looks like the Force Ghost.
Yeah.
Right.
Like that's awesome.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It was also like you were kind of spoiled collecting these figures too, because that's when they also started recycling the old vehicles.
Yes.
So now you didn't have to go hunting for them because Kenner started repainting them and putting them back out. Even some of the accessories, like if you want to buy Han Solo's blaster that has like the electronic sounds to
Right.
it, obviously they repainted it, and I luckily got the old one painted in black, which another story for another day. But yeah, I mean that stuff was now easier to get in a toy store. Um, and I kind of thought at the time maybe that kind of devalued the figures a little bit, but I don't know. I've heard mixed things about that.
Well, that's a big thing about devaluation right now. The Black Series, like you just talked about it, they're basically re-releases of the original figures, and a lot of people are like, "Well, this is going to hurt the value of the older figures." It's not. It's not like the older figures. People are going to covet those. It's the same thing as what we talked about earlier. You had your Hasbro collection. They came out with the retros. It didn't devalue the Hasbros. It's just a newer, updated version for our time now. I think that's a great idea because there's a lot of people that wanted figures of Darth Maul, and maybe they couldn't get one of the original one, so now all of a sudden you got these re-releases, and yeah, all right, they look similar, and the carding's a little bit different, but yeah, I mean, it doesn't. I don't, and I hate the idea of the devaluation part of it. If you're in this because you want your collection to be worth $1 billion, you're in this for the wrong reasons.
Yeah,
You should want to collect because you want
that
the
good feeling that
right,
you had as a
Yeah.
kid.
right. And now we're getting into like people who are like, oh man, if you could produce more of these, it's going to knock down the value. I don't care. If everybody in the world who wants one of these can have one of these, I'm happy for it because they're just as happy as I am.
Yeah.
That's the tough thing with figure collecting because a lot of these companies will do like a limited release of something and not everyone can get their hands on it in that limited time.
Right.
And that's what makes them rare, as I put up my air quotes. That's what's the rarity about them, is that there's not as many as like a standard figure would be. And I do kind of think it's a little unfair, but like Albert said, like if you're in this to like sell them and make money off of it, you're in it for the wrong reason.
I think the other thing that happened during this time was kind of like we were talking the other day about Power Rangers. Now, it got a little absurd as they kept changing the Zords every season, and it's like forcing you to spend more money to try to buy the toys. But that also started happening here for me too, because with Star Wars, they got so out of hand with. It's one thing to do the variants in a different costume, but when they started doing those deluxe figures, where it was essentially the same Luke, the same Han, but with a different accessory that's not in the film, like this huge backpack,
Right.
it started getting a little bit out of control. And then you start having everything that had to be tied in with Star Wars. Star Wars Monopoly, Chewbacca with snow on his body. Um, like every little thing after next, or a Star Wars talk boy.
Yeah, I can't believe they made those.
Yeah, it was like, okay, this is getting a little bit out of.
I mean, even still though now, like it's still a cash cow of a franchise. They can put out anything. Like we were just talking earlier, like the movie theaters have four different cups with like giant heads on them. I'm sure people are gonna go to the movie theater and spend $100 to have all four.
Yeah,
Cause hey, if you love Star Wars that much, by all means, if you have the money, go nuts.
there was a documentary I remember watching. Oh, I want to say this was right around either when Episode 6 came out, or it was getting ready for the new trilogy. And there was this a guy who like his entire room was just Star Wars stuff, and it's like everything, clocks, lamps. Like
Yeah.
if they made it, this guy had it, and it's crazy
There are
because
people out there like that.
right, and they are. It's the idea of it. You call it a cash cow, and that's what it is. It's a cash grab. And Gene Simmons from Kiss was the first person to, really. Sorry guys, it's my dog barking in the background. Uh, Gene Simmons from Kiss was like the first person to really like come out there and be like, yeah, I'm putting our logo on everything because people are gonna buy it. And if you're George Lucas, why aren't you doing
Right.
So yeah, I mean, now at that point, everybody was getting back into it because now special editions were coming out. People wanted to see it in the theaters again, and I certainly was one of those kids who begged their parents to go see it, even if it was late at night at 12 at midnight at the UA down by the West Shore Expressway.
that? Yep.
And that certainly got everybody hyped up again, knowing we were going to get these prequels. So I always made this vow when I was younger, knowing that was going to happen. I said, no matter where I'm at, if I'm not even collecting toys, if they do prequel figures, I'm buying them. I'm going to keep going. And then we got the Phantom Menace. Now, those figures hit before the movie got released. So
They
no,
did.
and everybody was hyped up for it. Everybody was going out and all the merchandising, all the hype, and all the tie-ins with like KFC and Taco Bell and all that. And something was already kind of like putting me off about the film even before it came out. And that was when I went to Toys R Us, and they kind of did like the first Force Friday around that time.
Right.
And we snagged these figures, but they were like $2 more than getting the regular Power to Force figures. And that was already kind of like doesn't feel right here. And you get a Liam Neeson as Qui-Gon Jinn, you got a young Obi-Wan in there. Did I really want to get a young Anakin Skywalker? Did I really need Padme and Queen Amidala, not knowing they're the same character? It was just something was kind of off about it. And then I saw the movie, and I was like, this is what the hype was about. I didn't hate it, but I just was kind of like, all that hype, all those long lines. And we were just spoiled with The Matrix a couple of months ago, and this thing comes out, and I'm like, trade deals and little droids and
Well,
Jar
the
Jar
that
Binks.
that prequel trilogy is mostly like political.
Yeah.
I think we could
Mm.
all agree on
Yeah.
that.
It absolutely is.
But I think the part where the hype come from and like people waiting on lines and things like that is that those fans that have been craving it for so long. Like, let's not forget during this whole time when the toy trend kind of died down a little bit because the movies weren't coming out anymore. Like, there were still like books and comic books being released with all this Star Wars lore,
Right.
and there were fans that were like all in on this stuff. Like, maybe not us per se, but like I didn't really like dive really into it until I was already an adult. But like, so those things didn't really affect me. As far as like episode 1 goes, like you said, the toys got released before the movie, and Funko does the same thing. Like, you might spoil something when they release a picture or whatever. But one of like the cooler things that came out of like Phantom Menace was Darth Maul.
Oh
Like
yeah,
he
no,
had
Yeah.
like he had the dope lightsaber, the
Yep.
double-sided saber, and just his look in general was awesome. Not that I mean, I guess he's a major character. Maybe he didn't really have a long life in the movie part of it, but that's one of the cooler things that came out of it. And I think as far as like the young Anakin, like I think what we were saying before, like they want to appeal to younger audience as well as bring in the older fans too. So I think there's like a gray area there, but the hype is always gonna be there.
I want to also give a quick shout out to Ray Park. I met him a few years ago at Comic Con, and he's one of the coolest guys
Yeah,
ever.
Yeah.
he's a
Yeah,
great martial artist.
And just the nicest guy ever. I met him in Disney. The second year I think I went to Disney. It was Star Wars weekend. Just like the craziest thing you can ever experience. It's like there's different booths of everybody just hanging out, and Ray Park was there, and just the nicest guy.
yeah. It's a shame I never gave him my business card because I didn't know he was going to play Snake Eyes after that, and I was like so happy.
Yeah, really.
Yeah, I mean, he's a great martial artist. I didn't know that was him until later on. But I also remember Ray Park. He played Toad in
Yeah.
the
Yes,
X
we were
Men
talking
movie,
about that when
the
I
X
spoke
Men
to him.
movies, and he was also in the King of Fighters movie as well.
Right.
I forgot there was a King of Fighters movie.
Yeah, you're not missing much.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I didn't collect the figures after that. That's when I kind of stopped. But I know there were so many, like with Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith, there were plenty of figures. Clone Wars.
Right.
I believe there were figures from some of the Timothy Zahn novels.
Right. And then you also start getting into Knights of the Old Republic,
Right.
and then those games came out, and everybody started going nuts over them, and like to this day, my friend John, who was the one who got really kind of like is responsible for getting me into being as big of a Star Wars fan as I am now, he just started telling me, he was like, "Oh, you gotta like see these guys. It's Darth Revan and Darth Malak." I'm like, "Who the hell are these guys?" And then like I started playing the Knights of the Old Republic games. I was like, "This is badass." And now, if you're a Star Wars fan and you're now going down that rabbit hole of,
Yeah,
hey, George Lucas says, sure, you guys can write non-canon Star Wars, stuff, and it's like, okay, now we're gonna play non-canon Star Wars games. you got to release the figures too, and that was another big craze.
Yeah, like you said, going down that rabbit hole, like Darth Revan is such a cool character.
Oh my God, yeah.
And maybe one day we'll get to see like an on-screen version of him, whether it's a Disney Plus series or a movie or
Well,
something.
there is a Knights of the Old Republic series rumored to be starting to, get started. So that might be something cool that we could see.
One thing also, we kind of skipped over this, but a figure set that I did collect during the Kenner run in the 90s was Shadows of the Empire.
Yes.
Now, that's something I wish they had adapted as a movie in some form, even if it was like all CG.
Yeah.
So, for those of you who don't know, Shadows of the Empire was a storyline that they created to take place between Empire and Jedi. It was basically the search for Han Solo, and they introduced this new character, Dash Rendar, who
Right.
was I guess he was kind of like a bounty hunter or
Yeah.
He
scavenger
was
type.
like the coolest guy ever.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Just that's the best way to describe it.
and
Just, yeah.
there was a Nintendo 64
Right.
game out of it
Right.
too.
Right.
Which is where I
Yeah.
yeah.
So I did collect those figures, and I still think, and I have the book. I think it was like really one of those missed opportunities I wish Disney could do in some way.
You know that with them having the license now and having their own streaming network, they're gonna want to delve into every piece of Star Wars lore they possibly can find.
Yeah.
Cash cow.
Yeah,
Now
exactly.
we'll get into the films that Disney made in a second, the new trilogy and so on. But there was one scene in Rise of Skywalker when Luke is telling the story about Leia when he was training her, and then they did the flashback.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah, spoiler alert if you haven't seen the movie. Although we're in January now, so
You never know. You never know.
Yeah,
Just
it's gonna make $1 billion next week.
Yeah.
yeah. So just if you haven't seen it yet, just pull your headphones away real quick.
But yeah, there's like a flashback of Luke training Leia with the lightsabers,
Yes.
and they were de-aged.
Yes.
I want a whole movie like that.
Yeah, I'm with that. I'd love to see
And
something
look,
like that.
I
And even
know.
if it's animated, I'm okay
I
with
thought
it.
that was an awesome scene.
Look,
That
even
was
though
a great scene.
Carrie Fisher's gone, you could get a voiceover actress to do it.
Sure.
Well,
Yeah.
I think they voiced her over in this movie on a few scenes. Well, she might have been passed away by then, but you can kind of tell like it wasn't her.
Yeah, I mean, you can obviously tell in the again, spoiler alert.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can obviously tell in the scene where they're taking her away. It's a completely different actress, just shot from the back.
Well, I think people know, like when she passed away, like the film wasn't done yet.
Right.
So she's not in every scene that the character is in.
Right. But no, I'm totally cool with the idea of them doing that as an animated film. Like, that's fine by me. It doesn't have to be live action. Just give me something.